between the Office of Economic Development and International Trade and the Department of Local Affairs through Division of Housing. OEDIT manages the Affordable Housing Financing Fund in partnership with Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, also known as CHAFA, which serves as the contract administrator. DOH administers the Affordable Housing Support Fund on behalf of NOFA. Organizations are only eligible for this funding if their project is located within a municipality, county, or tribal area that has committed to increasing their affordable housing stock. That is, as we all know it, opted-in communities. So if you have your community has opted in to Proposition 123, you would be eligible to apply for this funding. If you are in a non-opted-in community, you would not be able to apply for this funding on behalf of your project. Eligible funding activities. Please complete each application section accordingly per project and complete one NOFA application response per project. Do not apply for more than one project within the same application. Here is where we're going to go through what constitutes as pre-development as outlined by this NOFA. So that covers any professional fees, could be architect, engineering, real estate attorney fees, surveys, green planning and design. We also under each category have an other section where you could specifically name a different professional fee that is not outlined above. You would just need to specify what that is, and then it falls under professional fees. And then soft costs, which could be appraisals, third-party market studies, housing needs assessment, environmental studies such as phase 1, phase 2, lead-based paint, asbestos, etc. Traffic or wetland studies, geotech and soils testing, materials testing, your property condition assessments or CNAs, capital needs assessments. And again, we have another other category that you could specify that falls under soft costs that you would like to have covered. Ooh, I saw questions coming across. Alex asked, do municipalities need to have a commitment filing in 2024 or are those that filed in 2023 eligible? Both are eligible. So whether your community opted in 2023 or 2024, you are considered an opted in community and eligible to apply. There is the link to the eligible communities website, which just takes you to exactly that. You can go directly in here and find the, it should have taken you directly there. So we're going to get that link updated. It will take you directly to all the opted-in communities, and 2023 and 2024 will pop up on there because I don't know off the top of my head which one of those it's under. Another big point I would like to add here is that the applicant must provide evidence of site control of said property. Site control could be an executed purchase and sales agreement. So you do not have to have the deed. You do not have to have already purchased the property, but we would need an executed purchase and sales agreement or likewise documentation to show site control, which we'll cover more later in this NOFA. The applicant may be a private or public entity requesting to conduct pre-development activities on land or existing properties for future development. Funds available through this program are only available to applicants who are either a government entity, a tribal government, a housing authority, or affiliates of these agencies, or a small nonprofit organization. Small nonprofit is defined by those having total liquid assets of $500,000 or less. We have another question. Do you have a definition of liquid assets? At this time, current liquid assets could be anything that can be converted to cash in 12 months. Specifically, it includes unrestricted cash and cash equivalents and unrestricted investment accounts. Any other questions regarding the definition of liquid assets? All right. Moving on to requirements, as we talked about, that site control documentation. It could either be an executed purchase and sales agreement or other contractual agreement, land lease, warranty deed, option to purchase, etc. It must be fully executed. Conceptual and financial plan to complete all pre-development activities for said real property. So we don't need to see the financial plan for the full future development, but we do want to see, the way I look at it is the project that you're applying for funding for is just the pre-development activities section of the project. So all sources and uses for all pre-development activities for the project. Commitment that residency in the future development will be for home ownership opportunities for households at or below 100% AMI. As I mentioned, that is written in statute of Proposition 123. Additional considerations. We will be requesting a project narrative. It must include information about targeted population or populations and conceptual development plan for future use of the site. Big part of that is, right, for us to consider that you will be using the property for residents at or below 100% AMI for sale in the future. We also want to know the proximity of site to community services, transit, and other amenities that would benefit residents of the housing being developed. So mention of how close it is to any of those essential amenities, such as your local hospital, grocery store, etc. Presence of existing access and utilities to the site or future development plans for those items. So is it already on a road that has utility access? Is it not? Do you plan on building that in as part of the project? Just a narrative speaking to that. Award details. Pre-development funding provided under this NOFA will be in the form of a grant. DOH's form documents must be used to contract all pre-development funds under this NOFA. This will be a smaller grant agreement than those of you that have worked with us in the past. Will be a small dollar grant agreement. So if you have any questions about that, please get with your housing development specialist. They can correspond to any questions you may have about those form documents. Another question, is commitment of residency for households at or below 100% AMI 100% commitment for all use, or is there a percentage that can be used not within those parameters? So good question. We will add that in our facts. I will state any of the funds that we put in have to go towards that 100% AMI. So if you are looking at on a proportionality basis, if all your pre-development funds for the entire project scope, including maybe some market units, is going to be, say, 100,000 and you're requesting 25,000 from us, then we would expect at least a quarter of that to be at or below 100% AMI. But we will follow up in a fact with more information regarding mixed use and mixed income properties. And later, I will show you what website you'll be able to get that off of. Moving on, application instructions. Applicants must submit a notification of intent to apply that I had mentioned. So 15 days prior, you'll just email that letter of intent to your housing development specialist. There is a link to the housing development specialist map if you do not know who your housing development specialist is for your region. There is also a LOI template on our website. If you do not have one of your own, you're welcome to use that. Pre-development applications must be submitted to our application portal. That is the Neighborly software system. The housing development specialist in your region will open up that application for you. So just make sure you're in contact with them and they'll get that opened. The pre-development application contents are outlined here. That narrative we already spoke about, as well as applicant and pre-development team bios and supporting documentation that just demonstrates a track record of your project completion history, supporting documentation, anything that shows your affordable housing development experience, compliance with state regulations, etc. We do evaluate each applicant's capacity to fulfill the objectives of the project by evaluating similar projects that you've completed in the past. Please also make sure you include any partnerships you plan to use. So if you're planning on partnering with, say, your local housing authority or something like that to do your deed restriction management, make sure that you include their bios as well and outline that in your application. For nonprofits, we do need to see that IRS determination letter. If you have any questions regarding what that looks like, you are welcome to reach out to your housing development specialist and they can give you an example. Question just came across. What if we do not have a record of projects? We get first-time applicants every day. Definitely something we are used to. Biggest thing is speak to, like I mentioned, any partnerships you plan on using, or speak to what you plan to do to make sure that you're able to meet that requirements as outlined. Okay. We do need to see that Secretary of State certificate of good standing for all entities involved. You can get that off the Secretary of State website. We also want to see the property pre-development sources and uses worksheet. It is a simple SNU. If it'll load, I apologize. Pueblo internet is quite slow. So simple sources and uses. As you can see here, there's that line item that says other that you're able to fill out and add items if need be. So that will be submitted in Neighborly with your application. And then we need that site control documentation that we spoke about. We also need your audited financial statements, single audits, or CPA prepared financial statements, whichever applies to your organizational type. It should include the most recent 2 years plus the most recent self-prepared year-to-dates. For the year-to-dates, we want to see that balance sheet and profit and loss statements. The next item is the resolution to apply and signatory authority with the backup documentation. That it should outline who is allowed to sign both the application and the contract, as well as any future reporting documentation. There is a template here that you can use for that. We also are going to need a W-9 form for the grantee. So whatever entity will be receiving these grant funds and who we will be paying those to, we need an updated W-9, so it must be dated within 90 days of your application submission. And then a EFT form, which note taker Ashley, if you would please add, I need to link the document there, please. I will have a template linked in the updated NOFA to that EFT form that you'll need to fill out and submit with your application. And then we also need a signature block for the grantee in Word format. Any questions on the required documents section? That's it of the NOFA. So next thing I want to show you is where all of this documentation is going to live.
Fallon, quick question on the EFT. If we already have that on file, do we need to submit a new form?
I'm looking to see if we have an AM on file on the meeting. Andrew, do you know? I think they still do.
Still need a new
EFT form.
We can double check.
Okay.
We'll include it in the FAQ.
Any other questions?
Yeah, could you repeat the small nonprofit liquid assets definition that you rattled off. I couldn't write it down fast enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that can be converted to cash in 12 months. Specifically, it should include unrestricted cash and cash equivalents and unrestricted investment accounts. And we'll also be putting that in the facts read.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So the primary website in which, and I'm going to put these links in the chat, that this NOFA lives is on our RFA website. You can also get to it through our funding sources on our main DOH website that outlines all funding sources we have available. So if you go down to Proposition 123, aka Colorado State Affordable Housing Fund, you can go directly to the Prop 123 website funding opportunities and go down to New Construction AC Rehab. And it's going to be on the bottom of that page under Pre-Development Pilot Program. And it takes you directly to that RFA website. It also has that link to our Housing Development Specialist regional map as well. So this is how you can find who your Housing Development Specialist is.
Fallon, this is Steve
Yes.
Cordova. I had another quick question about the liquid assets being unrestricted cash. And for those who have multifamily properties, are escrows, replacement reserves considered restricted cash? Or are you only looking at the unconsolidated core organization and not the related multifamily properties?
Those would be restricted, Steve, because they are restricted to that property.
So
You
any
cannot use them for cash
Okay.
pre-development.
All right. So any cash related to those multifamily properties, even if it's operating, will be considered restricted.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yep.
And Fallon, how do we evidence that restriction?
That's a good question. That should be, I would suspect that would be in your audited financials. My suspicion would be, or it might,
And Andrew, so the definition per gap is restriction is only when there's an outside restriction, not an internal designation. So the audit will not designate those as restricted.
So, but it
Yeah.
would still be outlined in your financial statements that it is a reserve for said property, isn't it?
Depending on how the auditor will classify those on the balance sheet, only if it's an outside restriction. So I don't know how everybody else's is, but strict definitions of restriction and unrestricted really do apply on consolidated statements. So any property that does not show operating cash, for example, as a restriction won't show it as restricted on the balance sheet.
Send me those questions, Steve,
Okay.
and we'll add them to we'll have some internal conversations and add them to the FAQ.
Okay, sure.
And
Thanks,
to
man.
pile on that, we are a fiscal sponsor for an agency. We have their funds in our files. We have the operating agreement that could serve as evidence. We've got grants and loans where funds are sitting as cash yet to be deployed. So again, those contracts or those loan agreements, et cetera, all that needs to be provided as evidence, or does our financial statements with our designation of restricted funds suffice? Because our audited statements are going to be old and we're not going to get 2024 anytime soon.
Great question, Reed.
Yeah, I think, Reed, we want to talk internally about how we're going to prove and put that in the facts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stick with us because this is the first time thing. So we're still trying to there are a lot of questions and a lot of, potential obstacles, hurdles that, we haven't quite contemplated yet. So the more questions we get, the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
I think even like lending funds are also going to be part of that, right? Because the funder may restrict them until first use, or like NeighborWorks of America, for example, based on our rating, we don't have we get capital funds, but they're not restricted when we receive them. So they only show up as unrestricted funds, even though we all understand we're going to be utilizing those to lend out. So they're not, again, I'll send you those questions and examples.
Yeah, please.
Eva put in the chat, what is the time frame between LOI and being notified to move forward? You can move forward. Your LOI is for informational purposes only. It is just so we can kind of prepare and know about how many applications we're going to receive.
Is the question, Eva, more around like what our timeline for review of applications once we receive them is, or?
I think it's more around the review time of how many applicants are interested through your LOI to then determine how your selection process will be to let folks know to prepare documentation for said application if you get asked to proceed forward.
Yeah. So I think that our plan moving forward, just not only with the pre-development NOFA, but just like our development applications in general, is to publish LOIs, as soon as we can after those LOIs are due. So I would suspect that we would probably be publishing those within, 2 or 3 days after we receive them. Does that answer the question?
No, bottom line is if you we're not asking folks to apply. We're not looking at your LOI and determining are you eligible to apply or not with this funding source, is my understanding.
That is super helpful, Fallon. That's what I wanted to get to, because that's different than how we've navigated the other Prop 123 funding sources. So super clarity there. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's for our informational purposes and because we have to report out how many LOIs we've received. So what you'll be doing is you'll be working closely with your housing development specialist and making sure you meet all the requirements prior to you even submitting an LOI, right? So we would expect you would not submit an LOI unless you meet all the requirements as outlined in the NOFA. Yes, you can apply without hearing back from the LOI. The LOI is for informational purposes for us. So you'll just be working. The main thing I want to continue hounding into folks is work with your housing development specialist, get them the documentation required ahead of your application submission deadline so they can review all your documentation, make sure it meets the requirements, to make sure that when you hit submit on that due date that you have a complete full application. Any other questions? That is really all I had. Honestly expected more questions than that. Biggest thing is make sure that you check out our facts page is going to go right here. And I'm going to put this link in the chat again. And then I'll go out in a news blast as well. But we will publish the facts page. Once we get those responses, we're going to follow up with every question that was asked here today, as well as follow up on those liquid assets questions. Yes, I absolutely will. Did we record? We did. So we will get that published on this website as well. So everything will be right here under pre-development pilot program. We'll have a facts page and I'll have the recording of today's informational session as well. Is there anything else folks feel like they need aside from reaching out to your housing development specialist to get going on your application in the portal? Anything you need for us to have open to everybody on the website? Yep, so deadlines are March 3rd is when the initial apps are due. You're going to need to submit an LOI 15 calendar days prior to March 3rd. And then if the $500,000 is not applied for and awarded during that first round. We will have a second round open with apps due May 1st, with LOIs due 15 days prior to May 1st. And all of that is outlined in the NOFA that is on that same website. And that's all right up here. And LOIs are mentioned somewhere. They're in here as well.
So to confirm, 15 days prior to March 3rd would be the 17th, President's Day?
Yep.
So does that automatically bump it to the 18th or the 14th?
It's the 17th.
Gotcha.
That's the luxury of email, Reed. We will be able to see the date and time stamp. So you can submit it early, but you cannot submit it late. So just make sure that email is to your housing development specialist by the 17th at 11:59 p.m. When is first round of funding expected to be released? What do you mean by that, Emily?
Well, if this is for pre-development funds, if we are looking to break ground in March this year, how do I apply for pre-development funds? Because the timing, like when is the funding for that first round going to be released? Can it actually pay for some of the pre-development stuff?
I would say that would be way too time crunched, Emily. So you apply March 3rd. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're going to have a review period to go through all these applications. They are, right, like I mentioned, not a full grant agreement like you're used to seeing with our regular development funds, but you are going to have to execute a small dollar grant agreement, and we cannot pay for, just like with all state funding, we cannot pay for anything that happened prior to contract execution. So even if we, got these out, we're going to have that in the facts as well. We've been looking at that internally on dates. These do not have to go to State Housing Board for approval and such like you're used to seeing, but we will still notify State Housing Board. So even if you're looking at 60 days before you execute a contract after March 3rd, the earliest you could actually start activities would then be 60 days after March 3rd after you execute. So you're looking at May-ish at the absolute earliest.
And what is the time frame that you need to use the money? Do you have you have to use it in year 25, or could we use it in year 26?
Yep, good question. So we expect these contracts not to be more than a year. But that is something you can discuss with your housing development specialist on your needs. The whole point of these funds are for folks really to be able to get a project they know they already have the land, get that pre-development done so they can then, be teed up to apply for development funding and move a project forward. We don't want these just sitting because they could go to a project that was more ready. You could apply next year if you don't need them till next year.
Thanks, super helpful.
Absolutely. Yes, Carrie, we will put the actual dates instead of the 15 days prior, just to make that clear. Steve, for allowable soft costs, I would suggest that the financing costs also be an allowable item. We will look at that internally. We don't normally consider financing costs a soft cost. We have financing broken out as their own costs. So that's something we would have to consider internally. Construction financing costs are their own line items and sections, and so are perm costs. So we would have to consider that, but we definitely will bring that back to the group. No, pre-development costs already incurred are not eligible. With any state funding, we can only use funds towards things that have not happened prior to contract execution. So this would need to be, like I was discussing with Emily, if you are planning for a project to start development maybe next year and you're trying to get all that due diligence done to be able to apply for your development financing, that would be the best case scenario here. It cannot be for anything that's already incurred. Any other questions?
And excuse me if you already answered this, but the timeline on that from March 3rd, is it the standard 45 days plus 30 days plus blah, blah, blah?
It is not the same timeline, Reed. We will put that in the facts, what we expect. Because these do not have to get approval from State Housing Board. They also do not have to go through our formal review committee because they're small dollar amounts. It is going to be a different process, and this is the first time we've done this. So we are still having those conversations, but we'll include them in the facts.
I think we're going to kind of contemplate a similar, well, hopefully it's a little bit more speedy than like the Choto operating grants, but similar process.
So just a quick question on the $500,000 or less in liquid assets for small nonprofits. Why does it only apply to the nonprofit entities and not the rest? Or why should it apply to nonprofits and not the rest? Or only to nonprofits?
Like
I'm not sure I'm asking my question right.
Not local governments.
Is that what you're asking, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah, like housing authorities, right? Like Pueblo Housing Authority, Colorado Springs Housing Authority, theoretically, they are eligible to apply and they're huge, right? Even DHA. So, I mean, they're eligible to apply much larger than many of us nonprofits.
But are they, Steve?
I mean, I think that the goal of this really is, for these smaller nonprofits, and not, I don't want to I'm not knocking on, Denver Housing Authority or anything, but like Denver Housing Authority has assets and cash that they can use for pre-development. They're probably not going to come to us. We're looking more for, total concept size, you know what I mean? Organization. So, yeah. And that might be something that we could look at revising, if we revise the NOFA, with some of the questions that we get to kind of gear more towards some housing authority type entities.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Every dollar counts for every development we all do, regardless of the size of the entity or project. So we're all going to be looking for dollars.
For sure. Please feel free also to email Andrew and myself any follow-up questions you think of after today. Let me, now that I'm not screen sharing. So these are due March 3rd with LOIs due on all right. I'm going to try and get the facts out by next Wednesday, the 29th is going to be my goal. So, be in contact with your housing development specialist. Check back on that website I gave you all the link to. We'll get the facts posted there, and then they'll also go out in the next news blast that DOH does. But I don't know off the top of my head when that is. So just keep an eye on the website, or your housing development specialist can email it to you as soon as it comes out.
Well, you guys have done a fantastic job. Thank you so much for allowing this opportunity. I think it's fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. We've been hearing for years that DOH needs to have some pre-development funds. So super excited to see this one come to play. All right, talk to you all soon. Thank you very much for joining. We'll have this linked as well as the facts and any other follow-up documentation and potentially any changes to the NOFA will be posted.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for the
Thank
clarity.
you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, guys. Eric, you joined late, man. We're already done.
But happy to answer questions, Eric, if you've got any.
I know. I'm staying on so that Eric can ask if he does have any.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.